Welcome to the University of Houston School of Communication Vodcast.
Welcome to our first actual lecture this semester. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of the modern computer. To talk about computing in general, though, you have to think a little bit about the history of where computing in general and the logic behind computing comes from. So before we talk about the computer as we all know it today, let's quickly kind of take a step back in time and look at some things that we all take for granted. How about mathematics? The concept of mathematics. Now, as college students and certainly adults now, you know that math is a very important part of our life. But would it surprise you to know that the whole idea behind a computer is math-oriented? Anybody surprised about that? I certainly wasn't. If you think about it, a calculator is a computer, right? To talk about computing, though, we have to look at the person who's really responsible for creating the concept of computational analysis, which is really where we get the idea of the computer in the first place, the name computer. What is a computer? You know, you think of, you can conjure up ideas or images of Star Trek. Look at the old black and white images of the big giant computers that took up a whole room with the big bulbs that produced energy. I mean, it's really a neat thing to look back on, but let's talk about the instructions that make a computer work. The first computers then, if we think about it, were not necessarily these things that we see nowadays in our computer labs and at home. How about the old abacus? There's a device that we can think of as a computer. It didn't have any electricity involved, but certainly it did. It was a computer in all sense of the word. It helped us compute, right? But when we think about computers, and certainly in this class, we're not thinking about ancient or antiquated technology. We're thinking about the stuff that we have today, things that have electronics involved, electronic components. And so when one thinks of a computer today, we usually think of your PC, your Dell computer at home, your Mac, your Apple computer. And that's really the best way to kind of split them down, isn't it? If you think about it, the computing world is really kind of morphed into either Mac or PC. And after traveling around the world, I can tell you that's true no matter where you go. If people have a computer, they have a Mac or a PC. Now, just a little side note, the computers mostly in Europe, they don't really like Windows generally, the operating system, which is where we're leading here in a moment, by the way. They like things like Unix and Linux, but if you think about a computer, you're really thinking about a Mac or a PC nowadays. But really, don't neglect the other computers, you know, the graphing calculators and things like that. And they all work the same way, really. So where did all this stuff come from? Well, and it's really kind of the topic of today's lecture. It came from a guy by the name of Alan Turing. Okay, and Alan Turing is somebody that you probably have never heard of before. Anybody in here heard of Alan Turing before? Wow, okay. I'm just interested to know, where did you hear about Alan Turing?
PBS.
Really?
Yeah. Made a movie.
And I'm sorry, that's okay.
Made a movie about him. I forget what it's called.
They made a movie about Alan Turing?
Yeah, I think so.
Are you thinking about the movie called The Enigma?
No.
No? Because that was kind of similar.
I want to say it was like an HBO movie or something
okay.
like that, but it had to do with the whole British intelligence thing. And
I never saw that. That's pretty interesting. Well, good. I'll have to look for that. But good. I'm glad that a couple of people have heard of Alan Turing. For the rest of you, though, hopefully after today's lecture, you'll remember the name Alan Turing because it's very important. Alan Turing is known by professionals in the field as the father of computer science. Now, that's a pretty hefty title to carry. Not only was he the father of computer science, but he was also a very big player in British intelligence, and has been credited by many as the reason why we don't all speak German today. As you'll see a little bit later in the lecture, he really has gotten a lot. He's kind of been slighted with the whole credit issue. If it wasn't for Alan Turing, we would have never been able to intercept and decrypt the German coded messages during the war. He also created the first electronic computer. Okay, and actually those things are out of order. He's definitely been credited with the father of computer science, but the first thing he did before doing the British intelligence and the bomb, which is the name of the device he created to decrypt the Enigma, was create the first computer. So before we can talk about Alan Turing and his accomplishments, we have to first analyze who Alan Turing was as a person. And really, in life, we know that there are all kinds of environmental factors that surround us that make us who we are. All right, that's certainly true for just about every one of us in here. And Alan Turing is no different. The environmental stimulus around this guy really helped make this guy the genius that he became, and the genius that he was before his untimely death. Alan Turing was not a man of material needs or wants. He did not shop at the finest stores. He did not buy the most expensive products. He did not have the latest technology, which is ironic because he was all about science and technology. He lived a rather meager life, and you should know that he was, by birthright, a member of the higher classes in Britain. Okay? So he had the ability, certainly the means, certainly the education and the drive, but chose to live a very simple life. With Alan Turing, his life was all about answering the unanswerable questions, the science. When he would look at things, he would say, why? Or why not? Or how? This way of living really ultimately proved or led to his fascination with the idea of an electronic computer. Because you have to remember, during Alan Turing's time, there was no computer that we're thinking of today. There was no way to feed instructions in the form of some programming language into an electronic device and have it do some computational analysis. This didn't exist. All right. Though his emphasis and his force and his nature in life was largely geared towards scientific study, he was a very lazy person. You've heard of people in education today, kids that go through the educational process that are just too smart to be where they're at. You guys have probably heard about that. You've got kids that go through the public school system and they don't feel like they fit in because they may be a little bit more advanced than others. And so they kind of get lazy and fall by the wayside, and they lose interest. They're not being challenged. Okay? This process of challenging somebody is really very important in the learning experience, especially when you're young. Okay? So Alan Turing then, because he didn't feel challenged in school, and because he was just lazy and lethargic by nature, he didn't do very well. He didn't perform very well. Okay? He did not perform very well in school. He was labeled as a problem child, as someone who was not able to be educated. This was terrible because he was a representative of the elite class in Britain. Okay? One thing you should note about Alan Turing also is that because he was a simple person, because he was not a man of material, and also was not a young man of material, he liked to fix everything. If something was broken, rather than go and buy a new one, he tore it apart, got down to the nuts and bolts, and fixed it. A good example of this can be seen with Alan Turing and his love for running. He was an avid jogger. He liked to run. He was physically fit, And he once took a very old alarm clock, the kind that would sit by the side of your bed, the large one with the 2 bells on top, and when it would go off, the hammer would swing side to side. You know what I'm talking about, the very big one. And he repaired it, it was broken, and then tied a string around it and would carry it around his neck as a stopwatch when he ran. And you have to imagine, this was a very large device, okay? Very heavy. But that just kind of solidifies the idea of what kind of person we're dealing with here, okay? So a little bit of background then on what led to the big shift in his life that caused him to be really interested in the idea of a computer. Well, first, you should know that Alan Turing had a very tragic experience when he was younger. He lost a very close friend to him, and to death. The guy died, kid died, but that process really hit Alan Turing very hard, and he started to question things very early about what the idea of death meant. What does it mean when we die? These are questions, by the way, that we still ask ourselves today. You know, the whole concept of what is life all about, mainly, basically, that's what he was asking. He was asking some very difficult questions. When you die, where do your thoughts go? Is that really it when it's all over with? You should also know that Alan Turing was not a religious man or a religious young man in any respect of the term. He was just not a religious person. He could be more closely associated with someone who was agnostic or an atheist. So you can see how troubling then this question would be. If you don't believe in some sort of a faith, if you're not a faith-based person, then these questions, these very scientific questions can then cause you to think about them for a long, long time. And that's what Alan Turing did. He spent a long time thinking about the whole idea of mind over matter. Okay. This death of his friend Christopher Morcom was really the underlying motivation for him to study things like quantum physics. Because if you think about it, quantum physics and mathematical analysis, this is really a step in the right direction to answering the question, what happens to our thoughts? Where do they go? Okay? He studied all kinds of things that were mathematical in nature, that were mathematically related, all to answer this question. What happens to us when we're gone? You could say that the guy was a little bit fixated on the idea. Maybe even a little bit insane, maybe? I don't know. Certainly, though, he was, to say the least, very interested in the whole idea. In 1933, he then went to Cambridge and studied mathematical reasoning. The whole concept of logic then, as we know it today, can kind of be summed up and come from the idea of Turing's investigation and research into the algorithm. That's a very important word that you're going to hear again in this class. And what is logic? I mean, how can we best describe logic? Logic is kind of a natural or scientific order of operations, maybe. Right? Logic is having some order where normally chaos would exist. A good example of logic, the term logic, or the actual concept of logic itself, would be a sequential, an if statement. And what is an if statement? Some of you guys are probably saying, what is an if statement? Well, if you've ever had any experience programming, then you'll know that that's considered something called a loop. And it's really an argument that you would use in programming that says, if this thing is blue, then this thing cannot be blue also. If then, if or, if else. Okay, these are logical statements. This is the foundation for the process of logical interpretation, and also what led to the algorithm, the invention of the algorithm. In 1935, he then hypothesized about some sort of method or process by which mathematical questions could be decided or solved. He did this research based on Hilbert's theory of decidability, and during the course of his study, he proved Hilbert wrong. Hilbert said that there could be one unique mathematical equation that could be used to solve every mathematical problem. And Hilbert spent his life trying to prove that. That was his hypothesis, that was his area of research, and he did his best to support his argument. Turing came along and in a matter of 2 years blew it out of the water. He said it's just not possible. As we know from today, some of the classes you may have taken while here, things like calculus, geometry, differential equations, all these things really came about because of Turing's 2-year investigation in the concept, the theory of decidability. After he proved Hilbert was wrong, he published, but he published too late. And as any of you may know in the academic field, if you snooze, you lose. You have to remember that Alan Turing was kind of lazy. So he sat on his finding, and he sat on it too long. And a fellow by the name of Alonzo Church went off and published his findings for him. So you can say that it was, we're talking about some plagiarism going on here back a long time ago. Alonzo Church took credit for Alan Turing's discovery. And this was the first example in history when Alan Turing was slighted by society. No one believed him. Okay? The problem with Church's publication in his research journal didn't really explain the relevance, the why. Okay? It relied too much on math and didn't really address the issues that started Alan Turing investigating this in the first place, the concept of mind over matter. All right? Because Alonzo Church's findings did not include any of this stuff, Alan Turing later published and was able to discount and discredit Church's publication. This took years. This happened over, I think, 12 years. What Church's theory missed then was empirical evidence. It just missed the empirical evidence. Okay. Naturally, like any of us today, having somebody steal your work might cause us to be a little depressed, maybe. It may make us want to step back a little bit and reinvent, kind of find ourselves, look at where we're at. So Turing then stepped away from it all, went behind the scenes, and began to focus on what Church published. I think he wanted a little bit of retribution for the guy taking his research. So he spent the next few years picking apart Church's publication and discredited every single bit of it. It was really his way to get even, so to speak. What he did during that process, though, was focus a lot of attention on the investigation of the whole issue of mind over matter. Remember, we're going back to the death of his friend. And he made a conceptual bridge between this issue. Now, note that I'm saying conceptual bridge. No one to date that I know of has been able to prove that there's life after death. Okay? No one to this day has been able to prove that once we are away from this physical being, that our thoughts are preserved. But mathematically speaking, Alan Turing was able to conceptualize this process. It was this investigation, this finding, which ultimately led to the invention of the computer. And we have to first step back a minute and say, well, how is that possible? What in the world does that have to do with a computer? And some of you are probably saying, oh, okay, I get it. Some of you are saying, wait a minute, let's investigate this a little bit more. So let's look at it a little bit in a little more detail. How in the world would that happen? Well, what does a computer do? What does a computer do? Anybody have an idea? What we tell it. Very good. But beyond that, okay, beyond what we tell it, what does it do for us? Thinking, I don't think a computer thinks for us. It's a good thought, I mean, on your part, but I don't think we've come to the point yet where computers can think for us.